Africa is cracking the whip on greenhouse gas emissions, the driving force behind global warming. Now, the country introduced carbon taxes back in 2019 to encourage major emitters to cut their footprint and also to invest in cleaner operations. Now, most of South Africa's electricity is currently generated from coal. That makes it one of the biggest emitters in the world. Phase 2 of the carbon tax framework, set to come into effect in the year 2026, brings higher taxes and also fewer incentives. CGTN's Julie Shire tells us more.
South Africa is the most carbon-heavy of all G20 economies because of its deep reliance on coal for power generation. To rein in big polluters and meet climate targets, carbon taxes were introduced in 2019 at $7 a tonne. A range of incentives were also implemented to cushion the blow for business.
It pays or causes companies to pay for the emissions, but also in that process then ensure that there's a certain set of incentives for these companies to either reduce emissions over time or make good on changes, transforming their production processes so that they become greener in their outputs over time.
The squeeze of emissions coincided with South Africa's worst electricity shortages, prompting sweeping reforms and a surge of investments to boost supply.
If we look at the likes of Anglo, they've introduced hydrogen vehicles for their excavation. If we look at the likes of even Sasol, which we know is a high-emitting company, entering into agreements for renewable energy generation to mitigate some of its use of coal-fired power.
Phase 2, set to begin in January 2026, will bring steep increases and reduce tax-free allowances as South Africa ramps up efforts to decarbonize the economy. By 2030, transgressors could pay nearly $30 per tonne for emissions.
What is going to be important is to understand what the impact is going to be financially on companies and how they are able to do that, and are they able to cope with that, and what could be the transition support mechanisms, because I think the intent is to push the transition.
Companies still have a chance to come clean by investing in renewable energy or carbon offset projects. South Africa currently has over 40 initiatives generating carbon credits that help heavy emitters shrink their footprint.
We're seeing a landfill gas where basically people are seeking to reduce methane emissions from landfills. We've seen a lot of projects in relation to biomass to energy. And we've also seen projects which are seeking to reduce rural populations' dependence on biomass cooking. So actually aids the reduction of emissions from deforestation.
The City of Cape Town's carbon credit auction of almost $2 million for cutting landfill emissions is one example of how business and government can drive the green transition. There's plenty of opportunity for businesses to clean up their act in modernizing transport, water and farming systems, or by investing in South Africa's ambitious new energy plan that could see coal losing dominance. Julie Shire, CGTN, Cape Town.
Well, let's explore Africa's carbon markets even further. Reshma Shah joins us now. That's the lead, a carbon markets lead rather at FSD Africa. Great to have you with us on the show. Now, as we just heard there, looking at the current market in Africa today, there's certainly opportunity, there's demand, but just how much investor confidence is there in Africa's carbon markets?
Thank you for having me on the talk today. I think there's a strong and growing investor interest, but confidence is still uneven. The demand side, buyers seeking high integrity credits is there, yet investors remain cautious because of policy uncertainty, verification bottlenecks, and questions around revenue sharing. But I think the key thing here is what's recently changed is that Africa is no longer viewed as purely a source of offsets, but as a frontier for value creation. So we're seeing a real shift towards gourmet carbon, credits that deliver measurable biodiversity, livelihood, resilient core benefits. And these are all elements that are increasing investor confidence and showing that Africa can deliver high integrity, high impact assets backed by credible governance frameworks.
Now, you talked about a number of things, including policy. So, curious, how can Africa then use its own resources to fund climate change programs and also push that agenda forward?
Yeah, so Africa has both the need and the means to fund its own climate resources. So question is not whether Africa has the resources, but whether we are capturing the full value of those resources. And that's what I mean by bringing in the core benefits as well. This does not mean that by any means that we're saying that that we are removing any responsibility for anybody else in terms of the emitters, in terms of putting in climate finance within Africa as well. To put that in context, Africa contributes less than 4% of global emissions, but there is a need because it suffers most severe climate impact. And how is those needs and how is that climate finance actually going to be funded is by mobilizing its own resources. And this is really not about absolving others from obligation, but it's about asserting Africa's leadership, shaping the rules of engagement, and ensuring that climate finance works for Africa. So how does that do that? Turning natural capital into investable assets. Africa holds 30% of the world's carbon removal potential through its forests, mangroves, peatlands, and savanna. So these ecosystems are actually economic assets capable of generating sustainable and locally owned revenue, driving value through the carbon the pricing, and this is what I refer to as gourmet carbon, and actually getting premium value for its carbon and getting the uplift from the benefits, whether it's biodiversity, community benefits, or resilient outcomes, but also about establishing rating systems and integrity benchmarks that actually demonstrate the quality and verifiable impact. But in addition to that, innovating beyond carbon, actually looking at mechanisms such as nature credits, water credits, ecosystem service payments, and how these can be nature positive credit systems that also fund some of the nature positive initiatives that we're looking at. Probably the biggest one, I would say, is actually mobilizing its own financial system. So Africa's pension funds, insurers, and banks manage over $1 trillion in assets. By blending concessional finance and through tools such as guarantees, result-based finance, or carbon revenue-backed notes, the domestic financial institutions can actually fund climate programs while earning competitive returns. And it's really creating this self-reinforcing loop where Africa Capital Finance can actually fund its climate action. So there's a lot of scope there. And in addition to that, there's significant scope in terms of aligning climate finance to development priorities as well. So really here what we're talking.
As you said, there's a lot of scope there, but on the heels of the Africa Climate Summit, which was in September this year, also the COP Summit, do you think Africa has finally found a sort of unified approach to carbon markets?
We're closer than we've ever been. So when we look at what happened at the discussions at the Africa Climate Summit 2, the integrity principles that were issued by ODA-NEPAD, these all create a very strong political and technical alignment around high integrity African-owned markets. The one thing I want to say is unified does not mean identical. So each country is moving at its own pace, reflecting different priorities, but the real success is in a shared vision. And Africa at the moment has seen that carbon markets serve Africa's development goals, whether that's food security, energy access, job creation, and it's not just a global offset demand. So this alignment in purpose is what's beginning to give Africa a coherent continental voice.
Well, we're certainly watching closely. Many thanks for those great insights. That, of course, was Reshma Shah, the carbon markets lead at FSD Africa.